Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Let's talk product prioritization. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Product Management Talk, and I hope as always you all are doing fantastic. This episode is an extension of the previous discussion Abhishek and I had over product prioritization. And we're going to take it forward and see how product prioritization works in the real world.
The Product Management Talk. Disclaimer: these videos, unless stated otherwise, are our own thoughts and ideas and do not reflect that of our company or third-party sources.
So Abhishek, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Anand. And hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing great. So the way we are going to do this, Anand, is, we talked about the 5 Ws last time. We are going to see how that translates into a business case, but more importantly, how that business case translates into use cases and then into stories. And how are we prioritizing the stories? We are going to use one of the most simplest forms of story prioritization, which is called story mapping. And this is just one of the ways. For me, it's something that we learned early in my product management days. For others, just for information, there are other ways also. I think we mentioned RICE, there's Moscow model. There are a couple of other models. You can pick and choose any one of them. The process, the way we do story mapping, or way we used to do story mapping in my last company, is we used to have a inception meeting, like a 2-day inception meeting, where we used to present the business case. Again, the business case is derived basically from understanding the 5 Ws. We used to present the business case. We used to define the themes based on the business case. The themes is to translate into use cases, and then the use cases to translate to stories. That's essentially the process that we are going to do. We are going to take a hypothetical company. We are going to talk about what the company is doing and sort of where the company is at right now, and what are the next things that we're going to do. But before we go over there, Anand, do you want to do a 2-minute refresher of the 5 Ws just to set context?
Yes, absolutely, Abhishek. Let's start with the 5 Ws. The 5 Ws we discussed in the previous episode was why, who, what, where, how, and when. Though you shared that these are mostly cyclical, but it's always good to start with why, because that gives you a reason why you're doing things. And as we discussed in our last, that why can be seen in various contexts. Here we're going to look at why only from the product perspective, which could be the product prioritization, or why we are building the product or the product release, to be very, very specific. So that is what the why stands here for. Then when we are talking about why, the natural context is who we are building this. What is the customer persona? Is there a single persona or there are multiple personas? It can happen that the same product is used by different set of users. There could be an admin user and an actual user. It can also be that, and it is always good as a product management practice, not just to think about the people who are going to use the product, but also who is the executive sponsor to the product, as well as who is going to make a decision to actually make a purchase of the product. Because all these things matter as we go ahead building certain product features. So that encompasses who. The what encompasses what actual feature sets you're going to build into the product. Do they address that who and why that we have just listed? Thereafter, we talk about where. Now, where is very important because you have to have a clear sense of demographics that you're going out for. This is beyond the persona. Persona is just about the users, but what kind of demographics these personas are in, which geographies they are in, what kind of economical or eco-socio background these guys come from. All that matters depending on what kind of product you are developing, but it is important to keep a tab on that, because that helps you also understand what geographies, what kind of people you want the product to reach to. Now, each reach would also define what, because you will then go to see what kind of deployment methodologies you're going to use to deploy this set of product or features downstream. And it would also help you do things like A/B testing. Going forward comes how. how you're going to deploy it, what's the cost, what is the cost of building the product, what is the time involved in building the product. Is the time and the cost involved in building the feature commensurate with the value benefit that both the corporate and the customer is going to get? Now, let me kind of retract back to why. When we are also defining by why, it is important that we keep both the view of the customer and the corporate, which means that what's the value benefit that the customer is going to get out of that why, and what's the value benefit the corporate is going to get from the product. So these two aspects are important when building the product. You need to have a clear understanding of how you're going to address the customer's needs and how does that fulfill the corporate vision or the strategy that has been that has come down to you from the executive leadership. And that then defines your how. So how is the cost of building it, how it is going to be built in terms of what technology engineers are going to use, or what cost is involved, what time is involved, and then all that put together puts your how. Finally, it is when, and when is all about when this feature set really makes sense in the in the customer environment. So neither we should be too early nor too late when we are releasing a certain feature or a product set. So Abhishek, these are the 5 W's as that we spoke in the previous episode, and let's move from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Anand. So, guys, we are going to do a bit of a role play. So, Anand is going to be the product manager. So, we are going to build up a case study. We are going to give, like, this is what the corporate vision is or the product vision is. And then we are going to question Anand about how he would go building that roadmap out or the story prioritization out. So, overall, we're talking about a company, let's call it Company X. Company X is focused on understanding the strengths, weaknesses, passions about students between age group of 14 to 19, and then translating that into a very focused outcome as to what the student should focus as a part of their future education and as a part of their career. And this is the report that we are going to give to their parents so that their parents can help invest in that particular aspect. So let's say, for example, we find out that a certain child, a certain student is good at painting, but understand technology also. So then we might want to focus him into, we might have an outcome which says like he would be a good product designer. He would be good in UX, where you're mixing the creativity with the technology and building a very good career path. End of the day, what we're trying to do is help these students become the best of their versions so that they are happy in what they are doing. And that's what we are going to give as an outcome to their parents so that they can start investing. Like, if he wants to be a graphic, a creative designer, let's get him enrolled into some designing classes or a graphic design classes, etc., etc. Right. So that's the product that we're talking about. What we have done now is we have run a couple of experiments. We have run a couple of validations and hypotheses. We have found that this is a proven product. We have gone ahead and tested around with 20 parents and around 100 students, and they have benefited to a large extent with what we are building. We want to build. Our next step is to make it more scalable and use technology to enable and automate this process. Right. So that's where we are at now. So we want to build that product out. We are looking at what should be the first MVP be, and we are looking into how we can apply the 5 Ws into the use case themes and stories. Anand, we are looking at building a product where we can support 20,000 students. That's the context. Anand, how would you drive this project ahead?
Abhishek, let me kind of sum up what you said. There's already a product which has been proven, and now the job is to make this product scalable to 20,000 students. So let's start from here. Abhishek, let's look at the user journey to start with. Now, you've already said that the product has proven that it helps children and parents understand the career direction. So with that in mind, let's look at what are the things that we need to look at when we are going to scale the product up to 20,000 users. So in order to do that, let's see the user journey. So the way I would look at it is the best approach is to go online with a website where parents can come and evaluate the product. They can evaluate the product by reading through some of the literature that is posted there. And then we can provide the parents with an ability to register their children, their ward, where the children can then come and take a demo session where they can very quickly, in 10 to 15 minutes, get to have a glimpse or a snapshot of how the product works. And based on the snapshot, we can give them some results which can show them that this is the direction in which the reports will come out. So this would be a parent engaging with the product, then the child engaging with the product, and finally, as the report comes out, it would the parent and the child engaging with the product to understand the outcome, and then moving into the next level, which would be making the payment for a full exercise. And after the payment is made, the exercise is provided to the child for them to engage and give all the requisite inputs that are needed. And after that, the report is generated, which again is for both the parent and the child to understand and evaluate the direction in which they are the best careers that are available for them. So this is the course of the journey. Now all we need to do is make it available to 20,000 users at any given point in time. So there are a couple of things that I think of when I think of the what. One is, how can I make the backend system robust enough so that it can scale to 20,000 users. Now this is the application stack and the deployment stack. The other thing that I also have to think about is, when I'm talking about 20,000 users, we have multiple kind of endpoint devices that would access. So what endpoints are mostly available? Because if this is my MVP, if this is my first iteration, then I cannot be building a product which can accommodate all kind of end devices. I have to look at the majority of the end devices and the majority of the endpoint apps that can access my product without necessarily a lot of changes that are involved at the endpoint. Because that would mean that they have to install a new app, they have to do something with the product to experience it firsthand. As I said, since the user journey starts with a website, let us have the website as a mode of deploying the app, right? And then later, maybe in the next set of iterations, we can look at if we want to make it mobile driven. So this is something again that goes into product prioritization, because I, as a product manager, I have to evaluate, do I need to build a product which is mobile end device app, or is this an app which is browser friendly? Now, there could be a lot of things which I can achieve more in the app. I can provide more security, I can provide more control, I can ensure that the person who is taking the assessment is the child and no one else. No one else is helping the child. A lot of things can be done. But let's understand this. When we are talking about these first 20,000 users, when we are scaling up, we are talking about early adopters. And early adopters are usually those people who would not fudge with the way they are interacting with the product. So this is how I would look at what endpoints I have to support. When we are sharing information between the product manager and the engineering, as the best practice, it is always advisable that be as precise when communicating to the engineering. So when I say browser, it does not mean that I'm going to write the requirement as we need to support browser. It should be I need to support X version of Y browser. So it has to be a matrix which should say Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, Cake or Opera, and then I have to have versions on top of them and say supported, not supported, supported, not supported, and how it will go forward, because every browser we support is an ecosystem which would need qualification as we go forward. So there is a work that you are kind of asking your engineering to do as we move forward as well. So you have to think of that as we go forward. So when I'm looking at my MVP, I would look at the most used browsers today, and I would maybe pick one or two at max and can go from there. So now let's move forward. So once we have decided that this is a browser base, the next thing is what part of the user journey do you want to really address in the first go? There are a lot of components that are involved. The first thing is the workflow itself. And in the workflow, there is something called as the payment. Now, the payment itself is a complete class and a subroutine of programs that need to go in. There is a lot of engagement interaction that has to happen with third-party products. There's a cost involved in those integrations that are there. And when you're doing third-party integration, again, those questions have to be answered from product management perspective. What is the integration? What kind of APIs are available? Now, as a PM, you don't need to go into the level of API, but you need to know what are you looking from that integration and let the engineering come back. But again, if this is my MVP one, I would try to cut short depending on how soon your management wants to roll out this product. Because you should understand and appreciate that this whole thing has to also have the agile and the lean methodology at the back of your head, which means that when you are scaling up, if you are putting too many moving parts and you have to make a change, you have to make a change at a lot of different levels. So you want to be progressive about it. So you need to, as a PM, I would suggest plan it out, but don't get into the feature. So again, this comes back to your feature prioritization. You might have thought about it, you plan about it, you story it, but and you should do all of this. By the way, I forgot, I should have said this earlier, and you should do all of this not in isolation. This should be done with your engineering team, with your UX UI team, with your documentation team, with your support team, because all of these are stakeholders and are going to play when you are building the product. And they should have a clear say of what challenges they would face as you add another set of features into the product. But that said, let's quickly move forward and say, do I want the payment to be right now, or maybe I might push it out? So there could be, you can find out, it could go both ways. You can find out, hey, maybe the quantum of work involved in integrating is not a lot. We can do it. Maybe a crude one, or maybe it could be a full-blown one. But it has a varying degree of integration that you can put in. You can say only credit cards. You can say only UPI. So all said and done, each of these decisions that we make all depend upon going back to the theme that I as a product manager have decided upon, or I have been told by the management, which is scalability. So I would put all my efforts to ensure that my system is scalable to address that 20,000 users. And if there is anything which is outside of scalability, I would put it on a lower prioritized list. Again, as I said, the reason for that is not that we don't want to build it. It's just that you want to be out in the market quickly, test out if the product is scalable enough. And once you've seen that it scales, then you start building the next set of features. The second thing that can come into perspective as we move ahead is that giving the exam. Now that is the core of the product. Essentially, the backend system which is taking care of administering the exams should have a way which can scale up to 20,000 users. And again, when you're talking to your engineering, that has to be very clear. Are these 20,000 simultaneous connections which are concurrent in nature, or these are 20,000 connections over a given period of time. If these are 20,000 connections over a given period of time, then you have to again go back and say what is the concurrency, because you have to test your product to be scalable to that number, and that number has to be provided by the product manager. So if your concurrency of giving exam is 20,000, that should go. If your concurrency of people logging on to your website and registering is 20,000, you have to say that. If the number is that no, it has to be a funnel, then you have to define the funnel, that I'm expecting that 40,000 people will hit my site at any given point in time and register. And from there, I would narrow it down to 20,000 users, or it could be 120,000 users, whatever be the number. This is something that as a PM, you have to put it very specifically when you are defining the requirement, and then go about looking at the prioritization. Again, prioritization goes back to the goal that we started with, which was scalability. So once you have defined very clearly that this is the feature that I want for the product to address in terms of administering the exams, the next and the final one is that it should provide a report, and that report should be securely available to the user. So there should not be any way and mean where one user gets another user's report and vice versa. So these are the set of prioritized lists that I would provide to my engineering, and that's how prioritization works. The question that comes is what happens to the other aspect of it. And as I said, these would be the things that you would want to test as we go forward. The first thing is we test scalability. If all goes well, then we look at the next set of feature sets, then we build that up, and then we go from there. So we have shown you how we moved from why, we defined the who, then we decided what. We also considered how, because as I said, we would be working with a set of people, not work in isolation. Then when we are talking about 20,000 users, we have to also keep in mind as a PM what geographies we are going to deploy it in, and that would define your deployment methodologies. It might happen that if you're looking at two different geographies, which are two different countries or two different regions or continents, you might want to be aware of two things. One is that the deployment is in those zones, because you want to reduce latency. That would improve the performance of your product. And the other hand, every time you are adding another region, you have to also look at what compliance norms you have to form to address that region. So if you see, as Abhishek in the previous episode says, these are all connected in a circle. They eventually will move. You will move in a circle. You will kind of move from one point to another, and may not be in a sequential form. You might be jumping from here to there, but these are all interconnected, and each of that has to be weighed for every feature that you want to work on to. You have to address for each feature why, how, what, how, where, and eventually when sometimes plays a little less role, as we discussed in the previous episodes as well. But in all honesty, you have to be very sure, do I want to put it in this feature list or I want to move it out? So to that extent, time plays. But yeah, keeping that aside is how you would go about prioritizing your feature list.
Right. So the one other thing I would put is, there are a lot of ways the stories get prioritized when you're working with your engineering team. So you built out the MVP as to these are the top use cases that you want. And now when you're trying to break that out into individual stories that the engineering team can build, you will be using process like story pointing. You will be using process which is the most voted one. So there are multiple steps. Even story pointing has got multiple ways, based on the organization. Some use the effort and the days as the number of days as a story point. Some use the story which has got more weightage and translate that into story points. And that's where, that's the ground level that you are at. And from there on, it's pretty much, in most cases, engineering team taking it ahead and actually building and deploying the product for your first release.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, what you rightly said, objectify each of your features as you go ahead. So story pointing is one of the ways to go about doing it.
Okay, I think Anand, that's what we wanted to cover today. And so overall, I think if I have to give a quick summary, you take the 5 Ws. The 5 Ws sort of moves, if you take a tangent or splice the 5 Ws, you come up with the themes, the use cases, and the stories for your, and which again defines your first MVP and your release. Certain things you have to take care of, like business basics, and which would consider like where are you going to deploy, what kind of security measures are you going to take, what kind of compliance laws are you going to meet, governance, risk, and compliance, as we call it. So this will become your business process or basic business operations, and then you will go into story pointing. That is something that more often than not your Scrum team will be doing, and before actually putting that into a particular sprint and getting the stories out. I think that pretty much sums it all. Anand, you got anything to add?
No, I think you. I think you wonderfully summed it up. And folks, if you have any comments on the discussions that we had, if you use any other kind of tools, do write to us. And if you want us to kind of address how we can use this 5W framework again in those tools, we would be more than happy to take that. And again, Abhishek and I both request you to subscribe and like these channel, because that would help you get notified as we create the new videos and come out. So with that, stay safe, stay happy, have a great week and a weekend ahead, and we'll again come back with another episode of the Product Management Talk. Thank you for listening. Good day, goodbye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.